Let's begin our time with prayer. God of grace, we give you thanks for this time, this opportunity, this way of being together. We pray that you would be with those here in this place and those who are gathered among the internet. We pray that you would inspire us, empower us to learn more and to learn more deeply about you and the ways that we serve the community around us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So, of course, we've been thinking a lot about the creeds. I've been thinking a lot about the creeds as I prepare for these things. You may not have been thinking a lot about the creeds this week. But last week we started this conversation about the creeds in particular. And technically, we as Lutherans, in our Lutheran tradition, we confess 3 creeds. Now, we know 2 right off the bat. Let's name the creeds. Anybody know one? Obviously, one's the Apostles' Creed. The second is the Nicene Creed. Does anybody remember the third? Glenn knows the third, the Athanasius Creed, right? That's this, curiously, it's not even in our red hymnal. It was in the green hymnal, it's still in the green hymnal, but it was omitted in the red hymnal, which I think is an interesting move, but it's very long. If you're interested in seeing the Athanasius Creed, grab one of the older LBWs, the green hymnals, and you can see the Athanasius Creed in all its glory. It's quite long, it's quite detailed and graphic and interesting, and it takes a long time to read in a church service. If you've ever been to church and they've read the Athanasius Creed, you know you've done the creed. The Athanasius Creed. Yep. But primarily we use, in the context of worship and baptism, we use the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed. The one that we're focusing on particular for right now is the Apostles' Creed. It's the oldest formulation of faith. And as we talked about last week, it was originally derived as a response to a 3-part question for baptismal candidates. So when you came to be baptized, the presider would say, "Do you believe in God?" And the response would be what we now know as the first article of the creed. So if you would like, grab one of your ELWs, the red hymnals, and you can have the text of the Apostles' Creed out in front of you. Let's go to that small catechism section. Of course, they're in the worship services in the front matter. But if you would go to page 1162, that's the beginning of the small catechism that's recorded in our hymnal. (1162). It's all the way in the back. Do you need a hymnal, Shirley? Would you like one? There's some there, yeah. Yeah, if you need one, yeah. Oh, you can't hear? Huh. Oh, okay. Is anybody else having that hearing? Okay. I'm sure you talked about it because last Sunday they were playing. Oh, okay. So last Sunday we went over a little bit of the Apostles' Creed, and then we talked a little about the articles that Luther explained. Do you see the small catechism there, 1162? Those page numbers on the bottom. Our hymnal is so confusing because we've got hymns and psalms and all sorts of numbers. And then, of course, they printed it, I think, in the smallest typeface possible. It's still hard to read. Last week we talked about Luther's explanation of each of those articles, and each one of those explanations begins with that classic, what has become known as that Lutheran question, what does this mean? And what does this mean for daily life and faith? And of course, Luther wrote those 504 years ago. I think that's a question that Luther ought to continue to be asking, what does this mean? And so that is in some part why this class was created, for us to continue that question of, well, what does this mean? That's what it meant for Luther, that's what it meant for the apostles or the early baptized. What does this creed mean for us? So you can see the creed there as and you can see Eric's got the first article there up on the screen. The first article is confirmation students' favorite article, if we're going to memorize by articles, because it's the shortest. The first article there is, I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. The creed is seen in those 3 parts, the first, second, and third articles. The first article refers to God the Father, and you can see the Trinitarian formula. The first is God, the second is Jesus, and the third is the Holy Spirit. So the 3-part Trinitarian formula there is represented in the Apostles' Creed. But I'm interested in those first 2 words of the Apostles' Creed. What does it mean to believe something? What does it mean to say, I believe? Recognizing something is true. Yeah? What else? What does it mean to say, I believe? Trust. Yeah, trust in something. Yeah, that's another great definition. Yeah. Follow. Yeah, for sure. There's something about following in there, but what does that say more about what that means? Follow. Maybe I believe this in such a way I will organize my life around it, or this becomes a way of following, a way of life, right? It's interesting to examine all of these deeply embedded church words and say, well, what does that actually mean? What do I mean when I say I believe? In anything, in something, in God, or I believe my car is still parked where I left it. I love you. How is that a belief? Wow. Yeah, I believe I love you. Powerful, right? That's an amazing way to think about that. And the vulnerability to say, I love you, and would hope that that love is reciprocated. I am also loved. Wow. Didn't see that one coming, Arnie. That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I believe. Yeah, I feel that way, let alone love. I believe I love you. Yeah, that's fantastic. What experiences or reinforcements or conditions are necessary to be able to say those words, I believe? I believe my car is parked where I left it, because it usually is. Faith. Now, see, there's another big church word. Let's unpack that. What does that mean?
Well, you say, I believe my car is where I parked it. You're making an assumption.
Yeah.
You
I can almost see it.
have faith that it's still going to be there when you get back.
Yeah. There's a faith that kind of fills in that.
So it's unseen. If you can't see that your car is still there,
It may not be.
it's unseen.
Yeah.
So that's faith.
Yeah. Historical experience. There's kind of a continuity of historical experience beyond just mine. What's that? Oh, because I parked it there too. Yeah, yeah. But I thought you were talking about maybe that larger human context of, both could be true. Yeah, yeah. People have long before me been parking cars, and they're generally where they left them, and so that suggests to me that mine is probably still there too. Yeah. Right. One of the things that I loved about what we had a conversation in the adult forum about resilience, and one of our senior members said something about living through hard times. One of the ways that she felt resilient was because people have lived through hard times for generations, talking about the Depression and grandparents and parents and living through hard things, and know that we can live through this hard thing because we're resilient people, and we've done hard things before generationally. Maybe not our generation, but we've got historical experience that informs or empowers us to say those words, I believe. I believe we can do this because we have a historical continuity of being able to do hard things before. So. What else? What else is necessary? What other conditions would you need to be able to say, I believe? I've already done it. Yeah, yeah. Your own. Yeah. Yep. Been down that road. Mm-hmm. The contrast with what? With knowing. I've got that question later in my notes, but let's talk about that. What would you say the contrast is?
I think you know your car is where you park because you know where the keys are, you know where you're inside them. So I'm thinking about believing in something
Yeah. There's an interesting nuance there, isn't there? And I was hoping that we could puzzle that out. Um, can one believe in something like gravity, where we just objectively know it's true because we all experience it? Or do we just know about gravity? Is that a belief? And then it raises all sorts of questions about how do we believe in science? Do we know in science? Do we trust science? I think that question is particularly interesting in the context of the vaccine and the medical science in this moment. It's a really fascinating question. Yeah, Judy.
I was just going to ask you to repeat what Pam said because
Oh, right, and I'm trying to do that for the live stream anyway, because if you're not mic'd, they can't hear you. So up in the front, we had a question about what's the difference between believing and knowing. And that's an interesting nuance, distinction maybe. Because I know something, does that really rise to the level of something I would claim as I believe in this? So rather than saying I know my car is, or I believe my car is parked where I left it, maybe I just say I know my car is where I left it with reasonable assumptions. Now I'm getting worried about my car. But I'm pretty sure it's where I left it, yeah. Believe sounds like you have a little bit of a doubt. Right? I mean, it works all the time. But what, isn't it cool to put belief and doubt together as not competitive, but maybe complicit? Interesting. See, we're getting good here. Believing has a certain amount of freedom. Say more about that. I have freedom to know. So I have freedom to believe versus knowing is just, I guess I could not believe in gravity, but I guess know it is real. I believe in the giver of all blessings. Yeah. We do have a million blessings right here, don't we? Yeah. A million and maybe more. And all the salt we want. For those of you just in the live stream and didn't participate in the church service yet, we talked a little bit about salt during the sermon, so spoiler alert. I did know that. The word salary is derived from salt. Yep. They got paid in salt. Yeah. Mark Kurlansky wrote a book called Salt. It's the most fascinating exploration of the history of salt. If you ever thought salt would be interesting, turns out it very, very much. But there are conditions and experiences that we need to have to be able to say such a thing, that I believe in something. And I think it's interesting for us to notice what those are, whether that's historical continuity or personal experience, versus I know something, but I believe something. And there's maybe a gap of faith and room for doubt in that articulation of what we believe. And not that it's a bad thing, but that elevates this word belief to something maybe more significant than I know. Or maybe not more significant. Maybe I shouldn't put a gradient in there, but just say aside to. Yeah. Is belief a choice? That's another really fascinating question. Maybe Diane's saying, is it a choice here? What's the choice about belief? I believe it or not, yeah. Anti-vaxxers believe that they're going to turn to a frog or something, yeah. Now we're on thin ice. It's okay. Feel like I'm in good company. It's hard to hit me through the internet, so that's fine. Right. So I believe that I can't take a vaccine, or I believe that this isn't safe. Somehow that's a formed belief, but it's rooted in condition and experience, something that they've been taught. However, we may disagree with that position. And there's a choice. Yeah. So there's there's degrees of freedom when we start talking about I believe in this in ways that are different from I know this. Right? That's really a fascinating thing to think about, what it means to say I believe in something.
Where this would fall on Bloom's taxonomy of application of knowledge.
Yeah.
So it's not on the main list of cognitive domain words.
So believing, I'm just going to say this for the live stream, believing is not on the main list of cognitive verbs.
So knowledge, comprehension,
Knowledge, comprehension, application. Yeah. Analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. Yeah, yeah. Believing is considered an affective domain. Believing is a value. How interesting is that? So now we're blurring a little bit. We're getting fuzzy between subjective and objective, right? So belief is more subjective than an objective knowing category. Yeah, Judy. She started out her statement with I know, which we're now questioning, what do you know? What do I even know anything?
I heard you say the difference between I believe and I know. It made me feel so good because
So the difference between I believe and I know made you feel good.
we know that we don't know.
We know that we don't know.
I still remember when pastors were allowed to question.
You can remember when pastors were allowed to question.
Yes. 'Cause I
Maybe they still are, I wonder. I wonder if they still are. They should be able to question. Yeah, they should.
You know that. Do you see what I'm doing?
Yeah, Judy's doing this kind of motion for us here. I do that a lot, yeah. Because I believe the truth is not necessarily represented in a pole, or as in like a polarization, but it's represented in the harmony between the two. And that's very Lutheran of me and my little persuasion there. Yeah.
So anyway, I really like that.
Judy really likes that. I'm just saying this. I'm saying this for the live stream because they can't hear you. So, but it's fun to say that out loud. The other Judy on the other side. Belief is not necessarily the truth. Wow, I like that. Let's say more about that. She believes she said enough. Can we do that? Because people will be touching and. Oh my, this isn't working?
It's cutting.
Okay, okay.
Okay, so my mic is cutting out. Whoa, that's a different sound. Yeah. I believe this is different. Oh, there's another Judy on the field who has another statement. Yeah. What did Judy say? My truth may not be your truth. Yeah, so now we're talking about objective and subjective truths and all that kind of stuff. Who would have thought that we would have had such a mess in the first two words of the Apostles' Creed? Isn't it fantastic that we're able to do this and really wrestle with and question, what does it mean for us to believe? I also think there's something about conviction. I personally hold this to be true. So there's something about truth in there. There's something about objectivity and subjectivity. There's something about knowledge, but also doubt. I also wonder if me saying, I believe in something, opens curiosity. We've been thinking in the gospel text about how pride and the need to be in control can stifle our curiosity. Maybe saying, I believe, is a commitment to continuing to be curious, a continuation of that wonderment. Not I believe and therefore it's settled. I believe doesn't necessarily have to be a static statement, does it? Do you find that freeing or terrifying? freeing. I think there's freedom in that. It can be challenging. Yes, absolutely challenging. What would you say challenging? Why is that challenging? Jesus and his disciples were always challenging. Jesus was always challenging the disciples. Yeah. They're always in dialogue. What's real, what's true. Yeah. And perhaps one of the most cynical, maybe interesting moments in the entire New Testament is when the condemned Jesus is standing before Pilate and he says, "And what is true? What is the truth?" As this kind of hands in the air, abandoning, objective truth. Yeah. Glenn, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but there are some people when they say, I believe that's it.
Some people, when they say, "I believe," and that's it.
If that's it, there's no discussion,
And then no discussion,
it's all over with.
it's over with. The matter's settled.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting way of understanding what it means to believe something. But what happens when you ossify or harden, this kind of calcified belief system? What happens? I've got my suspicions.
Well, I would say you become stagnant.
You become stagnant. And what do we know from the world of biology? What do we know about things that are stagnant? They're not good. That's right? Yeah, there's something really hard when you calcify or ossify your belief. It fails then to adapt to a current contemporary future. If you just say this is it and this is the only way that this will be, it then fails to adapt and adopt to new circumstances. And I think if you take examples throughout history of what it means to be a disciple or follower of Jesus Christ, the Bible doesn't say anything about radios or televisions or Facebook, but how do we adopt our faith into these new venues and mediums and modes? I think that questions all sorts of things for us. And we need our ability to say, "I believe," to be somewhat fluid. Not that we're losing objective values underpinning those beliefs, but that we're allowing our belief in how we understand to adopt and adjust to current or contemporary contexts. Does that make sense? Did I lose anybody there? I just said a lot of words in a row. Yeah, go ahead. In the Bible, there's a lot of talk about living water. Living water is moving water, right? Yeah. Yeah, living water moves to the bottom, fresher water keeps moving. Yeah, there's this whole metaphor of living water, right? And moving water is an interesting metaphor for our faith, for our lives. It's always flowing. And I don't know, there's several poetic turns of phrase that I'm going to butcher right now, but there's something about how you can never step into the same river twice and those kinds of ideas where the river's always there, but it's moving, it's flowing, it's changing and adapting, and yet nonetheless, the river is still the river, even though it's changing and flowing and always new. Yeah. I think this opens up a whole wideness for what it means for us to have the audacity to say such a thing as, "I believe." There's something vulnerable about saying something like that, too. There's something personal about saying something like that. I think saying those words, especially in our society today, automatically makes you vulnerable. I believe this. If you put that on Facebook or Instagram, you might be inundated with people who say the opposite, or why do you believe that? Why would you say such a thing? A friend of mine is a pastor in Enumclaw, and he wrote an article for the local newspaper, and it was titled, "What Does My Religion Exempt Me From?" in the face of the questions for religious exemptions for vaccines. And the premise of his article was, "My faith doesn't exempt me from vaccine, but rather requires me to get one for the health and safety of my neighbor and my community." He had to take that off Facebook because of the death threats his family received. So in a way, he's saying, I believe in the importance of vaccine, and there's a vulnerability there, there's an openness There's a posture of openness that one must assume to have the courage to say those kinds of things. I believe. So we've got 2 words in now. We're doing well. Who would have thought we'd had so much fun in just the first 2 words? Let's add that 3rd one in now. Well, 4th. I believe in God. What does it mean to say those words today? I think throughout the course of history, even when Luther wrote his explanations of the Articles of the Creed, I believe in God had a different connotation than it does today. To be able to say, I believe in God in the public forum in this moment in time is a really interesting statement, and maybe for some fraught with peril. Could you say those 4 words out loud and feel safe? Could you say those 4 words out loud and feel like you would be understood? Could you say those 4 words out loud and feel like you'd be heard? There was a time, and I think in our human history, or the Middle Ages, even early Americana, when a belief in God was just kind of the air we breathed, and it was just a normal assumption that, of course, everybody believes in God. I don't think we can take that same assumption for granted today. I think saying those words is, in some ways, unique in our current cultural moment. Is it still on our money? Yes, it is still on our money. In God we trust. It doesn't say, I believe in God. It just says, in God we trust. Yeah. Yeah. But what is that? So as I say those words out loud, what resonates? In this moment, it's the God we know. And there may be, when somebody says, I believe in God, be thinking about a different God or a different definition of God. Yeah.
Which is creating some issues that the United States of America was created as a God-fearing, God-loving nation. But now we want to make it narrow, that it's only the God we know.
Yeah, maybe in the foundation of the United States.
And so that seems to be sort of exclusionary and exactly the opposite of what the Bible says.
Yeah. So from the foundation of the United States, it's an interesting question. When they say, in God we trust on our money and in the founding documents, what kind of concept of God were they imagining? And how is that different today when we have all sorts of different understandings of who God is amongst different religious groups, even amongst different, communities of the Christian church? We live in a much more multicultural and multiple religious environment. It's a whole different ball game now to say those words, I believe in God. And how might those words, I believe in God, kind of one of the primary lenses of this conversation has been, is the creed a symbol of unity or an instrument of division? And I think even saying those words, I believe in God, can be interpreted in the world around us as something divisive. The rhetoric around religion has become almost toxically divisive. And so to say, I believe in God, becomes this declarative rather than the invitation to a conversation. And what if somebody doesn't believe in God the way I do? Or what if somebody doesn't believe in God at all? How are we thinking about these creeds and these statements as invitations to conversations rather than, well, you don't believe in God or you don't believe in God the way I do, you're not welcome in my church or my community or in my home or in this conversation, which I think is happening more frequently than we would like in our culture and our communities around us. Yeah, go ahead, Judy.
How does the term God, with AA, they always use higher power.
How does the term God, what does that mean in the context of like AA that says higher power?
Yeah, because I think higher power is more generic or enfolds more.
Higher power is more generic and folds more, sure. So that may be, yep. I feel like we're in, it's interesting territory to start to define God, right? I mean, all of our language of God is metaphor necessarily. a higher power. Tillich would say the ground of all being. There's lots of metaphors that we can kind of reach to think about God. We're going to get to one here in the Creed in just a moment. Go ahead, Judy.
I just, what I get more than anything, if I said, well, I was in church on Sunday morning, that's why I didn't answer the phone or whatever. And I get questioned, oh, you go to church?
Yeah. So Judy's saying that if she says something about being in church on Sunday morning, she gets questioned. Like, oh, you were in church?
And my experience has been, people believe, so you go to church, so you're a Christian, so you're perfect, or well, when you do this, you don't act Christian, or when you do that, and I'm trying to wrap this all up, but, so I get a couple of questions, or a couple of statements. One is, you believe in all that mythology.
Yeah.
And the other one is, I don't go to church because I can't stand there and say all those things because I don't really believe them.
Yeah, like the Creed. Like we stand and confess the words of the Creed, and they're like, oh, I can't do that. Yeah.
That's where the third article explanation is freeing.
Because I can't by my own power or understanding. Yeah.
And so trying to help friends and relatives understand, just because you're in church saying those things doesn't mean that you've got it all together and you understand it and you've perfected it all.
Right. So let me sum this up for the people on the live stream. So Judy's talking about just even the fact saying I go to church, and maybe that's why I didn't answer my phone or go to this thing on Sunday morning, how that automatically brings up sort of this question of hypocrisy is what I heard. Well, so you go to church, you're a Christian, but that didn't seem really very Christian when you did that, or why do you do this way? And I couldn't go to church because I couldn't stand there and say those things. I couldn't stand and say I believe those things. And all of that has all of that is kind of wrapped up in the connotation of that's what it means to go to church in a lot of the world around us estimation. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's really interesting. In fact, this morning, my daughter's got a soccer game, and I'm standing there with the other soccer dads, and like, oh, we'll see you at the game tomorrow. I was like, nope, I got to be at church. And they look at me like, oh, yeah, you're one of those, aren't you? I'm like, what do they mean by that? You're one of those. Yeah, and there's a lot of connotations in what it means to be one of the church people today. You're a hypocrite. You don't believe in science. You hate so-and-so. And there's a lot of toxic connotations that we're up against. Glenn, go ahead.
Well, part of the problem is the United States.
Part of the problem is the United States.
There's only two churches. There's the Catholic Church, and there is the
Two churches,
evangelical.
Catholics, or Roman Catholics, or evangelicals.
As far as anybody else goes, there's nothing in between.
There's some prevailing voices, yeah.
And people don't understand that there is in between.
Yeah, and Lutherans, our way of understanding our Christianity is kind of in between, right? I mean, it's always this between the polarities of the extremes, there is truth somewhere in that middle. I always tease Lutherans that we're radically in the middle. It's not because we're wishy-washy or indecisive. We're just radically there in the middle of that tension. And it's a funny thing to think about being radically centrist. We're radically middle. Yeah, go ahead in the back, Judy.
That's something, in the social circles, is that everybody knows I believe in God, and that puts extra pressure on me to be,
Because everybody knows you believe in God, that puts extra pressure on you
to be a better person.
to be a better person. Interesting.
And when I'm not,
And when you're not,
I bring up God's grace.
and then you talk about God's grace. Yeah.
But that being said, a lot of people in my social circles are not necessarily churched, and some of them believe in God, some might be a little bit agnostic, but they're still really good people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's an interesting
Yeah. So
phenomenon too. I mean, they say they're agnostic, but I kind of wonder if they believe in something,
sure.
or they wouldn't necessarily be so kind and gracious and all those things
Yeah.
that Christians are supposed to be.
So Judy's talking about friends in social circles that may be agnostic or wouldn't say those words, I believe in God. But they believe in something maybe bigger than themselves, and they're still good people. They're still able to be kind and compassionate and maybe our suspicion that to be a good person you have to be a Christian isn't true. maybe other people could be, decent too, which I suspect to be true. I've got to be careful now. This is all being recorded. When I run for president someday, this is all going to come back to haunt me. Other thoughts on that? What does it mean to believe in God?
Well, he qualifies to make sense by the Father Almighty.
Yeah, so that's a metaphor that we're going to open up here in just a minute. Yeah, let's just jump to that. I'm kind of out of order in my notes anyway, so what the heck. I believe in God, the Father Almighty. Often we've taken this as a literal image, and when we think of God the Father Almighty, join me if you remember this from Sunday school, I think of an old white guy in the clouds with a beard, and that's kind of the image that I automatically conjure. But this is a metaphor. This isn't actually who we believe God to be. The Christian church has never confessed that God is a man. I can actually drop this mic. I won't, I'm sorry. Right? How amazing that is. All of our language of God is metaphor. This is a metaphor. It's a human grasping at trying to figure out how do we understand our relationship with this one who we claim has created us, sustains us, and loves us. Liz in the back.
Yes, this seems like very archaic,
It seems archaic.
way to describe God.
It seems like an archaic way to describe God, sure.
It's not in step with the times.
It's not in step with the times.
Where I feel personally, I believe that God is perhaps gender neutral.
Sure.
God is father and mother.
So we're talking about like the kind of more gender neutral metaphor might be appropriate for our contemporary moment.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
In our, the creed, the prayers, hymns.
Creeds, prayers, hymns, all of that. Yeah.
This imagery of God as a man,
Yeah.
which I have trouble with.
Yeah. And just so you know, I'm repeating you so that for the sake of the live stream. Yeah. I'm not trying to interrupt you, it would be redundant. I'm not trying to steal your ideas. Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. I mean, we've been really wrestling in this current moment around these gendered languages that we've historically used for God and really wondering, is that what we mean to be true? And that's why I love the Lutheran Church. We're not just having this sake for linguistics' sake. We deeply believe that our words have meaning and create the reality that we occupy. And are we using the words that are creating the reality that we hope to see? And do we, in our commitment to gendered language for God, is that what we really mean to create for our future? And I think there's a really powerful question that's happening right now in our commitment to avoid gendered pronouns, to use inclusive and expansive language, because that's more of a more clear articulation of the vision of the future that we hope to see, where we are inclusive and expansive. Inclusive in our social participation, and expansive in our imagination for who God could be for us.
Maybe if we look at the word Almighty
Then there's the word Almighty, yeah,
in terms of the
yeah,
the power that's supposed to be behind the idea of Father. Or,
yeah,
I'm just
yeah, absolutely. We're not talking about a father, we're talking about the Father Almighty, right? So that's a unique qualifier on this metaphor of father or parent. And so in the metaphor, what we're talking about here is a father figure, right? As problematic as that is in the current context, we're nonetheless talking about the relationship of a parent who is a provider, a creator, a foundation for life in the home, right? Those were all the historical connotations and metaphors that would have been conjured. And this is not just any father, this is the Almighty Father, protector, provider, source. All of that is wrapped into this metaphor. And we may challenge the language, and rightfully so, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that question. We could talk about the parent Almighty, maybe. It loses some of the impact a little bit of the parent Almighty doesn't sound as, maybe this is my own bias, right? It's also distinguishing as masculine, which we don't necessarily mean. Yeah. She said I need to take a graduate course. We've made it forward.
And just start going, so politics in the church.
Politics in the church, yeah.
combined,
Yeah,
When this was written,
yeah,
was a very patriarchal society.
exactly. Yep, at the time this was formulated, it was very patriarchal. Yep. The father was the head of the household.
And hence all the pictures of the old white man with the beard.
Yeah, well, even before the white men entered the picture, when this was a uniquely Middle Eastern experience, they still had this patriarchal connotation of what it meant to be father and God the Father. I mean, even if you look through the Old Testament and those veins, that still has that, those metaphors are still at play. Yeah?
I think both Father and Almighty terms is very difficult for some people to say,
Sure.
especially if they have an abusive father, or one
So those words are hard to say, especially if they have an abusive father.
or one who felt they were Almighty, whatever they said went.
And the father acted almighty, abusive father who acted almighty. Yeah. So it's difficult to go to church and say those words and disassociate from that experience. Absolutely. Very problematic.
I was brought up Catholic,
Okay?
and we revered Mary.
Oh, yeah.
Mother of God. And so in the Catholic faith, we had more of, we had feminine metaphor,
Yeah.
imagery
Yep.
to draw upon, whereas in the Protestant church, we don't have that same reverence
Right.
for Mary.
So we're in the back talking about how they grew up Roman Catholic, and in the Roman Catholic Church, they have this tradition around Mary and this reverence for Mary, which provides a very significant feminine component of one's religious experience, which is absolutely true. There is this lovely feminine, and Mary's not nothing in the Roman Catholic Church. That's a big deal. I mean, Mary is venerated, is prayed to, is really just shy of Trinity. Maybe I said that on the recording and I shouldn't, but is very, very integrated into the life of faith of a Roman Catholic believer.
She's the mother of God.
She's the mother of God and revered as such. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Did I get in heresy down here? Is that the heresy police?
Never
Oh.
worried you could be out of have to leave your house for all these things to say and be recorded.
Oh yeah, no, we're pushing the boat out here a little bit. That's all right. Yes, we believe that. Yes, yeah. We don't have that kind of same culture of veneration for Mary, though. I mean, we believe those things to be true. It's just not, for whatever reason, in our tradition and culture to embrace it at that elevation. And maybe it could be. Maybe that's something that's missing. But I think what's also missing, is your earlier point, is our expansive imagination for some of these creedal formulas, in that could we imagine saying, I believe in God, the Mother Almighty? Yeah, so there's some laughter in the back. I mean, it just sounds like, well, that's not right, right? That's not the thing I grew up knowing and reciting and memorizing. It sounds, to some, very problematic. I believe in the Mother Almighty. But why should it be problematic?
How about just skipping that?
How about we just don't say that?
That
I believe in God the Almighty. Yeah. The attempt in the Creed, though, is to provide this metaphor of relationship and understanding of God the Almighty. And there's a contrast between Father and Almighty, right? There's this contrast between Father, who is a known, relatable person, and the Almighty, which is unknowable, which is big and abstract. It's almost a combining of things that are really dissonant. Go ahead, Glenn.
Oh, one might be, we don't have a gender neutral.
We don't have a gender-neutral term. No.
In there.
Yeah. The Almighty Parent. Yeah.
And the other thing is that in the Bible, really, there are, I think, more in the Old Testament, some very specific verses of what a father is supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah, the language is an interesting question, because English is unique, really, in most languages, in that we don't have a distinction between biological and linguistic gender. Lots of other languages, German, French, Spanish, I think every other language I can think of, has a distinction between biological and linguistic gender. So you'd have pronouns or particles that would denote whether something was masculine or feminine in the language. And so, a table would be feminine, a skirt is masculine. This is, there's those gendered categories in the language, and people don't automatically associate a biological gender with those linguistic categories. Where in English, we don't have that. If I say he, I automatically mean something that is biologically male, or she, something is biologically female. And we don't have that clear distinction. And so it does create problematic translations, problematic word choices. We don't have a reverent third article, so it's not appropriate to refer to God as it. That has a derogatory connotation. Some of you are bristling at that language even as I just suggested. We believe in God, the Almighty. Ooh, that doesn't sound right. Yeah, it's not a respectful or reverent connotation there for sure.
Although, wasn't with Moses, he said, I am that I am.
Yeah. So then we get some territory in which we can stand. When he's talking with Moses, I am, right? There's this kind of pan-gender or over-gender understanding of I am. I am being in this kind of agendered or non-gendered kind of capacity.
I am in Hebrew means something? Isn't the reason Jesus said, I am? Isn't Jesus who said, I am first?
Well, in Moses, I am who I am. There's this articulation of God being the great I am. And then in John's gospel, there's the great I am sayings that Jesus echoes in John 7. Again, this is recorded, and I'm getting this wrong and going to be...
Jesus said it first?
No, that would have happened before in the Old Testament. Yeah.
And that's why they had it. Because they knew about Moses.
Okay, so can we believe in many things? Yeah, so I'm going to jump us here through a little bit. So we can believe in many things, right? I can believe in God the Father Almighty. I can believe in love and grace. I can believe in, I think I'm now pointing back to the fact that our belief and our understanding doesn't necessarily have to be static. And we can believe and hold things to be valuable and central to our understanding of who we are and our life. And those can be complementary and not necessarily competitive. We can hold these values and hold these pieces and say, I believe these things to be true. I also believe we can say things like, I believe in God, and I believe the vaccine will keep you safe. I believe in God, and I believe we should take climate change seriously. And those aren't necessarily two alternative competing realities, but can in fact flow together. And without being threatening or competitive, understanding those sentiments to be rooted in these values who make me who I am. And that's an okay, or at least a decent way of understanding what it means to believe something. That this is not the only thing I believe or exclusive of me, but I believe broadly. Why do I need to believe in God? Isn't Jesus enough? Can I just believe in Jesus and skip all this part? What do you think? Some heads are shaking no in the back. Yeah. Go ahead. Wasn't Jesus' purpose to redeem us and lead us to the Father? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I think in some circles there's a temptation to say like, we're going to skip all that, God, divine stuff. We're just going to believe in Jesus. That's good enough. And I think that's an interesting temptation. But here, Wolfhart Pannenberg writes, only a person who is all too accustomed to look at Jesus with Christian eyes can fall victim to the idea that belief in God can be replaced by belief in Jesus and his message of love. Why should we go on believing in Jesus if in him we only have to do with a man like other men? Faith in Jesus depends on a conviction of the presence of God in him. Only that presence lends the historical figure of Jesus universal significance. And so what, of course, I'm trying to do is tip us into our conversation for next week as we think about the second article of the Creed. Why is it important that we believe in God? Because if we're going to believe in Jesus, our understanding and belief in God is the only, and God's presence in Jesus is the only thing that leads us to this historical figure of Jesus to have universal significance. So Jesus made manifest in the person of Jesus Christ is conditioned on our understanding of this first article of the Creed. Go ahead, Marilyn.
Well, this is kind of changing the subject.
You're going to change the subject on me. Okay, it's all right.
Creator of heaven and earth.
Yes, I didn't get there yet. Yeah.
That's a big problem.
Creator of heaven and earth. That is kind of a big problem for 5 minutes. Okay, solve it. Go.
I have cousins that went to Missouri Synod's grade school and then went to public high school, and they brought up the creation theory in biology class and were hooted down,
Yeah. So relatives from another Lutheran tradition that learned a different perspective of science when they came to the public schools were booed down because they had an alternative understanding of what it means that we believe in God, who is the creator of heaven and earth. Yeah. So, and I purposely kind of footnoted that. Let's pick that up next week. We don't have enough time to really delve into that in the way we should. But that, I believe in God the Father Almighty. We've explored those things. And then we'll jump into creator of heaven and earth and what that means. Because again, in our modern context, that is controversial. What does it mean to say, I believe in God the Father Almighty? Also being able to say, I believe in evolution and a historical natural process without being condemned a heretic. What does it mean to do those things? And I believe we successfully can. I believe it's important that we do. We acknowledge those things and take them seriously.
I know one other says creator and sustainer of heaven.
Creator and sustainer of heaven and earth, yeah.
He's actively involved in what's going on.
And there's an active involvement. As opposed to a way that maybe you could read this and say like, oh yeah, God created the heavens and the earth, and then kind of said, well, that's great, and kind of the deist or watchmaker God kind of wound it all up and set it in motion and has nothing to do with it. But there's a continued involvement and sustaining of that creating. Yeah. All right, my friends, we will pick that up, Creator of Heaven and Earth, next week. Join us here, same time, same place, same YouTube channel. Thanks for being with us. And if you've got any questions or comments, feel free to email me or catch me after the class. Thanks, everybody.